Okay, so the last thing that I want to do is still using geometric mean, except what you're going to have are pictures that are having you find 3 letters, X, Y, and Z. So they can look something like what's on your screen, where X, Y, and Z are in, say, the 3 traditional positions. One of the letters is on the altitude on the inside, one of the letter is on one leg, the other letter is on the other leg. So how you're finding these values is the same as what was done on the previous questions. The only difference here is instead of giving me the 2 separate values, they gave me the whole thing in the 6. So all I'm going to do first here is a quick subtraction, that if I do 25 minus 6, that's going to give me 19 for this part of the hypotenuse. So now I have my 2 little pieces. I have the whole thing. So this is just a matter of setting up the 3 geometric mean proportions, one for each letter, and solving them. So I'm going to do that. If you want to do that, you can obviously pause the video, do it first, and then let it play through for the check. So if I'm going to start with letter X, I notice that letter X is on my altitude. So that means I use the 2 individual pieces. So I'm going to have 19 over X, and I'm going to have X over 6. So X squared is going to equal 114. You can try and take 114, break it down. Unfortunately, you're not going to find any pairs, and that happens. Not everything simplifies. So when nothing has a pair, the whole square root stays. The square root of 114 is my answer, but then I still need the decimal version. In this case, we're looking at 10.7. And so there's my value of X. I'm just going to continue on, and now I find Y. Y is over here on the right. So I know that means I'm going to need this whole hypotenuse of 25. And if it helps, I'm going to need that little part that it's touching. So that means that I'm looking at the whole hypotenuse being 25 over Y. And then I'm going to need the Y over the part that it's touching, which is 6. So if I cross multiply my Y squared, 25 times 6 is going to be 150. I'm going to square root both sides. And so Y, again, take your 150, break it down with a factor tree. You're going to end up with a 5 root 6. And when I put the square root of 150 for a decimal, I get 12.2. Oops, I said 12.2, not 12.6. There we go. Lastly, that leaves me letter Z. So again, Z is over here on a leg. That means I'm going to need the whole thing, and I'm going to need the part that Z touches, right? So the whole thing is 25 over Z. And then I need Z over the part that it touches, which is 19. Let me do this maybe for Z's so that they don't look so much like 2's on here. So I'll kind of put the line in the middle. That means that my Z squared is equal to 25 times 19, which is 475. And so when I square root and I break that 475 down, that means the value of Z is going to be 5 root 19. And in a calculator, to get a decimal, I get 21.8. Okay, so this example is having you find three things, but those three things are the same things you were already finding. You're just doing all three of them in one picture. You may have to find part of the hypotenuse using subtraction instead of just adding the two pieces together, but still a fairly straightforward problem. Question 4 here is asking you to find x, y, and z, but what you should notice is that x, y, and z are not where they are supposed to be. At least not x and z. Letter y is on one of the legs, but in order to find a leg, I have to know the entire length, and that entire length is z, so that means I'm gonna have to find z in order to find y, and x is here instead of inside. What I want you to understand is that you're still setting up the same proportions, it's just you won't have the letters where they traditionally are. For example, when I'm trying to find this line here in the middle, this is in there twice, right? I would put 2 over the altitude and then the altitude over this number. And normally my altitude is a letter. Well, it's not a letter. I'm still going to use the same setup though. Part of the hypotenuse, 2 over the altitude, which is 3, equals the altitude, which is 3, over the other part of the hypotenuse, which is x. So instead of me having x times x, I'm not getting an x squared. This is going to be a more straightforward proportion. 2 times x is 2x. 3 times 3 is 9. There's no square root. This is a simple divide by 2. And my x has a value of 4.5. When I look at my picture, if I know what x is, that means I actually know what z is, because z is simply 2 plus x. So the value of z is 2 plus 4.5. So that means my value of z is 6.5. And once again, I didn't need a square root on this one, and that's okay. What that leaves me now is y. Y is in my traditional spot. I need the whole hypotenuse, which is z, and I'm gonna need the part, which is 2, that it touches. So whole hypotenuse, 6.5, over y equals y over the part that it touches, which was 2. So y squared, 2 times 6.5 is going to be 13. Square root both sides, because I do have a y squared. You cannot break down the square root of 13, so square root of 13 is my answer. And then lastly, put that in and get your decimal of 3.6. So it is possible to have your letters not in the original positions, but how you set up your proportions still is the same. Think about if the x was in the middle here, what would it have looked like? Still go through those motions. 2 over 3 equals 3 over x in this case. And you're going to get those same setups. It might mean that you don't need a proportion for every letter, like letter Z. I didn't need a proportion there. I simply saw in my picture, I need to add these two numbers together. So keep that in mind when you have pictures asking you to find 3 letters. It's possible that those letters won't be where you expect them to be.